My name is Betty Eileen Mia Bates. I never used, we don't do that in England, using this, the original name. We don't use that so much. Oh dear, my birthday's Christmas time, and I'll be 89 this Christmas, December 23rd, and been around here a long time. I was born in England, of course. I was born in the county of Staffordshire, which is right in the middle of England, and lived in small towns mostly in England. I was born in, I'll have to spell it for you. It's called Uttoxeter. It's Utoxeter, Uttoxeter. It's in Staffordshire. And Staffordshire is the county where a lot of the woolen trade and mills, but those are in the bigger cities. We never lived in a big city. We always lived in the country or in a small town. We've always moved around a lot. I don't think I'd like to even total up all the houses I've lived in now. I think it got to 40-something when I quit.
Oh my goodness.
I can remember certain houses. I remember one that was a big house. It was tall, and up in the top attic there was a lot of, well, to me as a little child, they were like toys. There were things there to look at, boxes full of stuff, probably all junk, but I loved going up looking at them. And there was I can remember looking out of the window and seeing a nice lawn with a lot of crocus, blooming crocus on the lawn. Must have been springtime. Oh, that's one I enjoyed. And then mostly there were farmhouses when we were growing up. Then there was one where we had a little shop and a little kind of bed and breakfast affair where people would come and stay overnight. And that was on the road to the school where we went to school. We had to walk about 2 miles to school. My dad was a farmer, always, and because it was the time then, things were not very good, the Depression. So sometimes he had to work for other farmers, and be one time I know he was what they call a wagoner, means they work with the horses. He was always very good with horses. And my mother used to tell the story about when they were first married. Now I think my sister was born, and they were she was in the little horse and trap, which is a little carriage, and the horse started to take off and run, and he was chasing, and my dad climbed over the back into the horse's to grab its mouth, to stop it. And my mother was saying, "Oh, he left me there," and the baby was falling on the floor. Every Christmas we used to go to my father's family, and they would have a big Christmas. There was quite a few boys. I think 5 boys, all farmers, and 2 girls who were married to farmers. So it was a kind of a busy. So it was my dad's family. And they were kind of a gruff pair, not too grandmotherly. She was strict. I guess she'd had to be strict with her children, and we didn't see too much of them. Mainly, I think, because my mother didn't like his family very much, so she would never want to go there. She would let us go on our own. And when it was Christmas time, my dad would take my sister and I, and my grandmother always made lovely toffee on Christmas, and we'd come home with a pack of this toffee, and my mother made us put it on the top shelf where we couldn't get to it. She didn't want to enjoy it.
Oh.
My mother's family, my grandmother died when I was about 7, and she had married this man who had 3 children, and she was a housekeeper, my grandmother, to a very wealthy title family, and very well regarded. They would send her on vacation and look after her, but I don't know why she married this man, but she did, and looked after his children. So she didn't have too good a life, but she died, and then I think my granddad lived quite a long time after that. There's one sister, Kathleen, and she was 3 years older than me. And when we moved to Canada, she came out a little bit later. We decided, both of us at the same time, to move. She had, she had 2 children, and Sheila, her daughter, is the same age as your mom. So they kind of, for a little while, grew up quite close together. Fairly close, you know. Mm-hmm. But she was 3 years older, and she went to work in a shop, and she used to kind of put on airs like she knew exactly what to say because she learned in this shop. And then during the war, she worked in a tobacconist shop, and because she had a high old time, all the guys were in there, you know, so she had a big choice of boyfriends all coming in to buy cigarettes. The school then, at that time, were quite different than they are now. We went to, I went to a village school, and when you got to be 10 or 11, you could sit for a scholarship to go to we called it what did we call it? Secondary school. Anyway, I got scholarship. I was the only one in my school to get the scholarship. And my teacher took me to sit for the examination. We were gone a whole day. And I knew I was going to pass. I was so confident. I know I'll pass. So I went to this Market Drayton Grammar School, it was called. But that was a little small town. It was at the beginning of the war, and a lot of the teachers were in the service. There was very few men teachers. I think there was only one man teacher. It was all women. So the women were doing a really good job, and I think it turned out very well because they were good teachers and they worked hard and they were tough with us. I remember even the gym teacher, we used to play hockey, and I was not very good at sports. So I used to choose to be left field, which was way out in so I could get my hockey stick and pretend I was doing something. And then we had swimming. I couldn't swim because I'd been to a country school. So, but it was fun. It was a good school. Yes, I had some good friends there. Yeah. One friend called Daphne Maurier, you know. And there were about four of us, I think 3 girls and 1 boy, who always vied for the top spots in the, it was always very competitive, the school in England. You got a place, you know, you were either first, second, third or fourth, or poor little soul, if you're down the bottom, you're like 40th. But the 4 of us were always kind of changed over between 1 to 4. And so we had a, you know, pretty good education. You know, it was during the war. You just wore what you had. You didn't have new things. And the food, you know, we didn't have the fancy food. We were lucky because living in the country, we did have food that was grown in our gardens, but we didn't have. I can always remember the first time I had a banana. I think maybe I'd had a banana when I was very little, before the war. When we were younger, we didn't have many trips because, for one time, it was the war started and nobody went on vacation then. And before that, when they were very little, I remember trips like a train trip to a seaside village, and you maybe stayed there overnight, or maybe it was a Sunday school trip. It wasn't anything real fancy, but we enjoyed it. But no, we never had big vacations, and so I guess that's one of the reasons why I like to travel or plan to travel, because I knew someday I would get to do that. Mm-hmm. One time where we lived, I was about 14, I guess, and we used to have gypsies. You'd come through the town, and they'd, you know, set up campground for certain land, and they'd come around the houses selling clothes pegs and things like that. And we had these gypsies come, and I was fascinated with these gypsies, and I went talking to them. And this one gypsy, they would tell fortunes, and she looked at me and said, "You will travel far." And I thought, oh, good. In fact, I can remember the day the war started, September the 3rd, 1939, September the 3rd. But hearing it on the radio, because there was no television. But I remember the radio playing, it was a Sunday, and hearing the Prime Minister say, "We are now at war with Germany." And my mother, you know, crying, and everybody kind of upset. My dad went and enrolled in the Home Guard, which was, we lived in the country, but we had an aerodrome near to us where the Spitfire pilots were trained, so you could see planes flying around training. In fact, my sister had a boyfriend who was a fighter pilot trainee, and except that he got kicked out because they found out he was only 17. He was supposed to be 18 to join up to be a pilot, and he'd almost finished his training, and they found out his age wasn't right, so they kicked him out. But then he went and joined the submarine unit, which was even worse than flying a plane. We don't know what happened to him. We had American soldiers in our town. At one time, a platoon of black soldiers, which was the first time I'd ever seen a black person. I'd never seen a black man.
Really?
And they used to send the American would send their black people have their time off in town on one certain day and the whites on another. We could never quite understand why that happened. You know, why can't they all come together? But that was my first indication of racial tension, was that. Yeah. But it was always interesting to to meet them and kind of get to know. They're all just kids, you know. I remember going out with one young boy whose name was Douglas, and he must have been like 21, and I think he was from Seattle area, and they seemed older, and yet you realize now they were just children. Everybody was in the war, you know.
Yeah.
Either that, well, actually no, because we lived in a farming community, and the farms around, and they had sons who were needed on the farm, you know, to produce. But we girls, we were very naughty. We wouldn't go out with the farmers' sons. We thought they were beneath us, you know. We wanted to go out with soldiers or sailors or airmen, and these poor guys who were farmers. And I always had a dread of having to marry one of them and stay in the country. I always felt I wanted to go travel and be somewhere else, you know. Oh, yes, yeah. Kind of played the field a little bit. He was in the Merchant Navy, and we got married and went to live in London. We'd gone down to live in Cornwall. We bought this little house, and it was in the I hadn't even seen it, but Granddad had a little they called demob money when he came out of the Merchant Navy, and he spent it all on this little house, which was not a good idea really, because there were no jobs around there. So we had a house but no jobs. So we didn't stay there too long. We went back to London, and for a little while lived with each parent for a few months. Then we bought a little house and stayed in London until we moved to Canada. And by that time we had 3 children. When your mum was born, I think probably Jennifer was maybe 7, and Paul maybe 4 or 5. Then your mum, the third, came along. So, and she was, I think she was only 2 when we sailed on a ship to Canada and decided to strike out there. We were all seasick, except for Paul, who was eating everything and ice cream. The waiters would ply him with all kinds of food because everyone else was sick. It was very stormy, and it was February, bad storms. And the girls and I were sick, and they were throwing up in the cabin. And Paul was running around eating. But anyway, we got to Canada and stayed in Canada for a couple of years. And your mom was just a little girl, but one thing I remember within Canada, she had bright red hair, your mom did, and I used to curl it, make little curls in it, and she was kind of chubby, and everybody used to talk about her with her hair color, you know, and say, oh, what a pretty little girl. And one day we were going to a little town, and there was a beauty contest going on, and for somehow she got involved in it, and she won this beauty contest. She had on, I could remember the dress she was wearing. It was a little cotton dress. You know, little girls didn't wear pants and tops in those days. It was always dresses. But she had this cute little dress, and she got first place in this beauty contest. We used to, I think we still have 1 or 2 where we'd make a tape and send it to England at Christmas. And I think when my mother died, Kathleen and I were over there, you know, sorting out our things, and I think I got one of the tape that I'd sent to her, telling about what we were doing, because it was not easy then. It's not like it is now, where you can email some or Facebook and all that. When we to communicate, when we lived in Canada or California, we had to write letters. And you write an airmail letter. You bought an airmail sheet of paper, and that was your way you corresponded. So it was work, keeping in touch with everybody. But we tried to. We kept in touch with family quite a bit, and my sister and Sten's, mainly one sister and husband, we've kept in touch with all these years. And they've been out to visit us several times. So, but it's so much easier now when you can just pick up your computer and type in some messages and get. In Canada then, my sister and the family came over, and they stayed with us for a while. She had 2 children, John and Sheila. And John was Paul's age, and Sheila was Fenella's age. So they enjoyed being together. And Sheila was just a little girl, and she had a funny little English voice. And one thing I used to say to her was, "Sheila, where is your mind?" And she'd smile and she'd say, "Under my dress." And it got to be a joke, we don't say, even years later we'd say to her, "Sheila, where do you keep your mind?" And she'd, "Under my dress." Oh dear. Your mother was always a peacemaker. Yeah. Jennifer was a little kind of, we used to call it highly strung in those days. She was always either on the top of it or lower. She's kind of like, who's very much like her is Amy. Amy should have been her sister. Very similar in to my sister, because Kathleen is Amy's grandmother. But Kathleen's daughter Sheila was a rather calm person, completely different. In fact, people used to say Sheila should have been my daughter, and Jennifer should have been Kathleen's daughter. Anyway, one of the first places we lived, your mum was just coming up to the age of going to school, and right across the road from us was a lady called Mrs. Midori, and she was a teacher of the kindergarten class. So I would take her to school. I got a job working part-time, and I would take Fenella to school, and then she would come home with Mrs. Midori at 3 o'clock and stay with her until I got home. So that was kind of fun. And that's where she met her good friend Julie, who she's been friends with all these years later. And Julie was very, she loved to sew and make things, and they would play dolls. Fenella loved to play dolls, but she didn't sew, but she organized. And Julie made these little dresses, and Fenella had them all organized in their boxes, and she would have them all. We used to laugh at her because she would have little shoe boxes, each like with a sign on it. This is Dee Dee's box, and all carefully arranged in there. So she's very well organized. It was kind of easier in those days. You couldn't do it now, I don't think, to move around. We were, I guess, considered resident aliens. We had a green card, and to get to do anything, you had to show your green card. And then we didn't become citizens until Heather was born. as she was the only one born in this country. And when she was born, we all decided we'd better all become Americans too. So we got our passports. We had to go to some classes, and not too difficult, but just about kind of remembering a few things. So we did that, all of us, and we all got our passports. She came on our passport, so her name was on my passport, I think. So when she needed a passport herself later on, she had to have quite a job of applying for one and getting one. Your mum was always very smart. She never was never any doubt that she would achieve whatever she started. Mm-hmm. Jennifer didn't go to college until she was older, but then when she did very well. And Paul was a stolid one. He would just plod through it, because it was something you did. So he plodded through college and did pretty good. Oh my goodness, we must have had hundreds between us of cats and dogs. And we had one cat that was called Big Head.
Big Head?
That was Granddad. Granddad always, he kind of liked cats, but he would never be sentimental about them. He'd just kind of call it Big Head. And we'd be saying, no, it's not Big Head. Oh, and I had a lovely little poodle once. It was Monique, I called her. But she always went by Feedy Weedy. Got a sweetie, and then did a Feedy. And she was killed by a dog next door. And one rainy day, a dog came out and grabbed her and shook her. When you have animals, you have a lot of heartache when they go, but they're worth it. So now I have this little thing here. Come say hello. Come say hello. Okay, go back to sleep. Oh dear. Where did we like to go? We always enjoyed going to Arizona, Prescott, Arizona. In fact, we almost moved there. There's so many places where we could have moved, and you think afterwards, what would my life have been like? Or what would the kids' lives have been like had we moved there? It would have been completely different. They wouldn't have met the people they married. It would have been a different life. I admired Jimmy Carter because he was a good man. It wasn't a particularly flamboyant or clever president, I don't think, but he was a good man. And then, of course, a fun one was Johnson, Lyndon Johnson. We always used to get mad with him because he'd pick up a dog and hold it by its ears. He'd pick up his dog, and Joe would say, don't do that. But he was just a real old Texas guy. And then Lady Bird Johnson was the one who had all the flowers planted in the roads in Texas. So now there's all bluebonnets and wildflowers at the sides of the road. That was her contribution. And then, of course, Jackie Kennedy. That was quite a thing then. And then, what was that? The Nixon problems. Oh, my goodness. Now, whoever's going to take care of this lot, it won't be me. But I'm very sorry that we didn't get a woman president. Yeah. Oh, I would have liked to have seen a woman president in my time. But I'm afraid that's not to be. You have to be aware of and try to make good choices. when you can. Can't always do it, but usually you can make a good choice and stay aware of what's going on in your life and be helpful. So girls are smarter now. When I was young, really girls didn't have much ambition other than getting married. And I always did other things as well, but I always, thought that getting married was the important part. But I always took classes of some kind, learned things like writing poetry or accounting and things like that. I'm angry at myself that I didn't, because when I went to live in London, I used to love newspapers, and I remember walking down Fleet Street, which is the street with all the big newspapers' headquarters on it, like Daily Express and whatever. And I'm cross with myself that I didn't have the courage to go into there and apply for a job, and say, I want to work here, I'll work for nothing, I'll just work. I should have done that because I think I would have enjoyed it. I think I would have been good at it, but I didn't. Yeah, I'd like to write. So I always have written quite a bit and enjoyed that. And I could have been much better at it had I tried. But it was the kind of the end of times, and then other things came in the way that you had to do. So duty calls. Sometimes at night, I think all these things come in your mind, and I go over things that I've forgotten about, or did I remember that properly? No. And that's what keeps me awake at night. And comes morning and I haven't been to sleep very much. It's best to do things and have different experiences. That's the best education you can get. And jump into it, and even if sometimes you'll be a little bit scared of doing something, but then when you start it, you find there's always somebody there who will help you, and to be kind to each other.